Captain Marcus Reed's hands trembled as the zip ties bit into his wrists, cutting off circulation in the same forearms that had guided a $250 aircraft through hostile airspace. He had expected a quiet Tuesday morning at home. Instead, the man barking orders at him wasn't a burglar he'd caught in his living room. It was a county sheriff with 15 years of grudges and a badge he wore like a birthright. And in exactly 11 minutes, that sheriff's entire career was going to collide head-on with the United States Air Force. Cedar Grove was the kind of town where nothing happened, which was exactly why Marcus had bought the house on Larkspur Lane. Quiet streets, good schools, far enough from Andrews Air Force Base that the roar of C-32s on approach was just a distant hum instead of a headache, but close enough that he could be wheels up within the hour if his phone rang wrong. Marcus moved through his own kitchen with the same economy of motion he used in a cockpit at 31,000 feet. Nothing wasted, nothing loud. 6 years flying support missions for the Presidential Airlift Group had trained that stillness into him. He didn't fidget. He didn't posture. He simply moved with the calm of a man who had already lived through worse mornings than this one. He was 34 years old, built lean and compact, with the kind of quiet bearing that made strangers assume he was either a personal trainer or a bouncer. Never a man who, less than 72 hours earlier, had been at the controls of a modified 757, carrying senior White House staff across the Atlantic. He wore a plain white t-shirt and grey sweatpants, standard off-duty civilian clothes for a man who spent most of his working life buttoned into a flight suit. His refrigerator hummed. His coffee maker gurgled through its final cycle. His government-issued laptop, still logged into the secure portal for his 0900 pre-mission brief, sat closed on the kitchen counter, 3 feet from where he stood pouring his first cup of coffee of the day, 40 minutes. That was all the time he had before he needed to leave for the base. He did not have 40 minutes before Sheriff Dale Whitfield decided his life was about to change forever. Marcus had grown up 200 miles from Cedar Grove, the son of a mail carrier and a school nurse, in a house where excellence wasn't encouraged so much as required. His father had told him once, not unkindly, that the world would forgive him for very little and remember him for even less, so he'd better be twice as good at everything he touched. Marcus had taken that lesson and built an entire life on top of it. Honor roll, a full ROTC scholarship, flight school at the top of his class, and eventually a seat at the controls of aircraft most Americans would never know existed. He didn't wear his resume like a chip on his shoulder. He wore it quietly, the way a man wears a watch he never has to check because he already knows exactly what time it is. Whitfield had been patrolling Larkspur Lane for a different reason entirely. A neighbor 2 houses down, elderly and anxious, had called in a report of an unfamiliar man loitering near the homes on the block the night before, a description that fit exactly none of the actual footage from her own doorbell camera, which nobody at the sheriff's office had bothered to review. Whitfield didn't need footage. He had 22 years on the force, and what he called instincts, though his fellow deputies had long since learned to translate that word as something closer to prejudice worn comfortably, like an old jacket he refused to take off. He parked his cruiser 2 doors down and walked the rest of the way on foot, one hand resting on the grip of his sidearm out of habit more than necessity. Through the front window, he saw a black man standing in a kitchen that, in Whitfield's mind, simply didn't belong to someone who looked like that. Never mind the sedan in the driveway, registered to Reed, M. Never mind the neatly mowed lawn, the American flag mounted beside the door, the small Blue Star service banner hanging in the front window. A symbol Whitfield had walked past 100 times on other lawns without a second glance, but somehow failed to register now, blinded by the conclusion he'd already reached before his boots hit the porch steps. Whitfield didn't knock. He hit the door with his boot, once, twice, and on the third strike, the frame splintered, and the door swung inward, banging against the wall hard enough to rattle the picture frames in the hallway. "Sheriff's Department. Get on the ground. Get on the ground now." Marcus didn't move at first, not out of defiance, but out of the split-second calculation that had kept him alive through 3 overseas deployments before he'd ever touched a presidential aircraft. Sudden movement got people shot. He set his coffee mug down, slow and deliberate, both hands visible. "Sir, this is my house," Marcus said, his voice level controlled, the same voice he used to read back an altitude clearance from air traffic control. "My ID is in my wallet on the counter behind me." I said, "Get on the ground." Whitfield's weapon was drawn now, hand shaking, with an adrenaline that had nothing to do with real danger and everything to do with a story he'd already written in his head. Marcus lowered himself to his knees, then to his stomach, a cold tile floor pressing against his cheek, his heart hammering despite the practiced stillness of his face. Whitfield holstered his weapon and dropped a knee into Marcus's back, wrenching one arm, and then the other behind him, the zip ties cinching down hard enough to leave white marks that would still be visible 2 days later. "You have the wrong house," Marcus said quietly. "You have the wrong man." "Save it," Whitfield snapped, hauling him up by the collar of his t-shirt. "Neighbor," said a strange man's been casing this block. "I'll let the judge sort out your story." He did not ask for identification. He did not check the mailbox with the name REID stenciled in block letters. He marched Marcus out through his own splintered front door, past his own car in his own driveway, and folded him into the back of a patrol cruiser like a man closing a filing cabinet on a problem he considered already solved. At the substation, they put Marcus in a windowless room with a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs, one of which he was not offered. He sat anyway, back straight, hands still bound behind him, breathing the slow 4-count rhythm his instructor had drilled into him during water survival training a decade earlier. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, ca. This was nothing compared to the pressure chamber. This was nothing compared to 200 feet underwaters with an instructor screaming in his ear. He simply waited. "You want to tell me what you were really doing in that house?" Whitfield asked, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe with the easy contempt of a man who had never once in his career been wrong and had therefore never needed to consider what it would feel like. "I already told you. I live there. I'm active duty Air Force. My ID and my orders are both in my wallet, which is sitting on my own kitchen counter." Whitfield laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Air Force? Sure. What are you, a recruiter?" "Captain, United States Air Force. 89th Airlift Wing, Andrews Air Force Base." Marcus kept his tone flat, factual, offering nothing that could be mistaken for pleading. "I need a phone call, and I need it now, or you are going to have a problem considerably larger than a burglary report. Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. I have a check-in at 0900 that I have never missed in 6 years, and if I miss it, people are going to start asking why." Whitfield rolled his eyes and walked out, letting the door slam behind him, unwilling to entertain the idea that the man he'd dragged out of his own home in handcuffs might be telling the truth. He didn't know that Aero 900 was fast approaching. He didn't know what "never missed a check-in" actually meant inside the Presidential Airlift Group. He was about to find out. At 0903, 3 minutes past the hour, a secure line rang inside Andrews Air Force Base Operations Center. Marcus Reed's seat had gone empty for the morning brief, and in a unit built entirely around precision, an empty seat was not a minor inconvenience. It was an alarm bell, By 0915, Colonel Denise Harmon, commanding officer of the 89th Airlift Wing, was on the phone with the Cedar Grove Sheriff's Department, her voice carrying the unmistakable cadence of someone who had commanded flight lines longer than Whitfield had held a badge. "This is Colonel Denise Harmon, United States Air Force. I need to speak with whoever is holding Captain Marcus Reed." The deputy who answered the phone nearly dropped it. Whitfield, summoned into the room, took the receiver with visible irritation, expecting a prank, or at worst, some low-level bureaucrat easily brushed aside. "This is Sheriff Whitfield. Who exactly am I talking to?" "You are talking to the commanding officer of a unit that flies the President of the United States," Colonel Harmon said, each word landing with the flat precision of a woman who did not repeat herself. "Captain Reed missed a mandatory check-in 3 minutes ago. That check-in exists because Captain Reed carries a security clearance that puts him inside arm's reach of classified movement schedules for Air Force One. When one of my officers goes dark, Sheriff, I do not wait for an explanation. I mobilize." Whitfield's mouth went dry. There's been a misunderstanding, We received a call about a suspicious individual. The individual you have zip-tied on your floor is a decorated Air Force pilot standing on his own property," Colonel Harmon said. "I have already notified base security and the Regional Air Force Office of Special Investigations. They are en route to your facility as we speak, and I would strongly suggest you have Captain Reed's restraints removed before they arrive." The line went dead. Whitfield stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, the dial tone humming into the sudden silence of the room. 22 years of instincts, and not one of them had prepared him for this. 18 minutes later, 2 black SUVs pulled into the Sheriff's Department parking lot. The men who stepped out of them wore no uniforms, only dark suits, and the unmistakable bearing of federal investigators who had been doing this a very long time. Special Agent Renata Cole flashed her credentials at the front desk and didn't slow her stride. "Captain Marcus Reed, now." By the time she reached the holding room, Whitfield had already, with shaking hands, cut the zip ties from Marcus's wrists himself. Muttering something that might have been an apology if it had contained any actual words, Marcus stood, rolling his shoulders, rubbing the raw red lines across his wrists without a trace of theatrics. He had learned a long time ago that the men who deserved his anger rarely deserved the satisfaction of seeing it. "Captain Reed," Agent Cole said, "on behalf of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, I apologize for the delay. We'll need a full statement, and Sheriff Whitfield's department is going to need to answer for the next several hours why an active duty officer was removed from his own home without so much as a name check against the registration on his own driveway." "I appreciate it," Marcus said. "But right now, I have a pre-flight brief that started 23 minutes ago. We've got a vehicle waiting to take you straight to the flight line," Agent Cole said. "Colonel Harmon's orders. You will not miss your mission." Marcus nodded once, and as he walked past the open door of the sheriff's office, he could hear Whitfield on the phone with his own attorney, his voice climbing into a register of panic that hadn't existed in that building an hour earlier. 3 months later, the county courtroom was packed tighter than anyone could remember, reporters lining the back wall, a sketch artist working furiously in the front row. The footage from Whitfield's own body camera had been played on a loop for the jury. The splintered door, boot against the frame, the words "Get on the ground" shouted at a man kneeling in his own kitchen with his hands already raised. The elderly neighbor's original doorbell footage, the one nobody had bothered to check that morning, was played next, showing clearly that the suspicious man she'd reported had been nearly 6 inches shorter and 20 years older than Marcus Reed, wearing an entirely different jacket on an entirely different night. The prosecutor did not need to raise her voice. She simply let the footage speak, punctuated only by Colonel Harmon's testimony describing exactly what kind of clearance Marcus Reed carried and exactly what kind of protocol had been triggered the instant he went dark. One by one, Whitfield's own deputies took the stand, each of them visibly uncomfortable, each of them forced to admit under oath that no one had cross-checked the vehicle registration, no one had knocked, no one had asked a single question before the door came off its hinges. His defense attorney tried to argue exigent circumstances, tried to argue a reasonable belief of danger, but the argument collapsed under the weight of 11 seconds of body camera footage showing Marcus Reed on his knees, hands raised, voice calm, saying the words, "This is my house," 3 separate times before he was ever touched. When the verdict came down, guilty on charges of unlawful entry, false imprisonment, and civil rights violations under color of law, Whitfield's legs seemed to give out beneath him. The same clatter of handcuffs that had once closed around Marcus Reed's wrists now closed around his own, and for the first time in 22 years on the job, Dale Whitfield understood exactly what it felt like to be judged before a single fact was checked. Marcus wasn't in the courtroom to see it. He was 40,000 feet over the Atlantic, guiding a wide-bodied aircraft through a bank of clouds toward Ramstein, his hands steady on the yoke, his voice calm over the radio as he read back a clearance from air traffic control. He had testified by deposition weeks earlier, given his statement without embellishment, and gone back to the only place he had ever really wanted to be, in the air, doing the job he had spent his entire adult life training for. That evening, when he finally walked through his own front door, a new door now, solid oak, installed at the county's expense, his wife Danielle was waiting with their 8-year-old son, Elijah, who barreled into his legs before Marcus had even set down his flight bag. "Welcome home, Captain," Danielle said, kissing him softly. "How was the flight?" "Steady," Marcus said, holding his son close. "Steady the whole way." It was, in every sense that mattered, an extraordinarily satisfying conclusion. A sheriff who had judged a man by nothing more than the color of his skin and the shape of his own assumptions had lost his badge, his freedom, and every ounce of the false authority he'd worn like armor for 2 decades. A pilot who had done nothing but exist quietly and competently in his own home was vindicated in the most public and undeniable way possible, not through anger, not through retaliation, but through the simple, unstoppable machinery of the truth catching up. If you believe justice should never depend on the color of a man's skin, if you respect the discipline it takes to stay calm, when the whole world seems determined to misjudge you, like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always comes out, and subscribe for more real stories of quiet heroes getting the justice they deserve. What do you think Sheriff Whitfield was thinking the moment he heard Colonel Harmon's voice on that phone? Let us know in the comments below.